The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark void between star systems. It was bigger than most moons and held the most important meeting place in the galaxy. Today, something special was happening. Earth had sent representatives to ask for membership in the Galactic Council. Ambassador Yan walked through the long metal corridors of the station. His black suit looked plain compared to the strange aliens moving around him. Behind him walked Dr. Mina, a woman with short hair who carried a heavy case full of samples from Earth. Next to her was Commander Jinwoo, a tall man in military uniform who kept looking around at everything with careful eyes. The three humans had traveled for months to reach this place. They carried with them what Earth called their package. It contained everything they thought would impress the aliens: technology, art, music, biological samples, and records of human achievements. Hyon hoped it would be enough. They entered the great council chamber. The room was huge, with seats arranged in circles that went up toward the ceiling. Strange lights floated in the air without any visible support. The smell in the room was odd, like metal mixed with something sweet that made Hyon feel slightly sick. Three groups of aliens dominated the chamber. The Vorthak looked like walking crystals that changed color when they moved. Light seemed to bend around them in impossible ways. They were known across the galaxy for their ability to control energy and matter with their minds alone. The Quellans were harder to see clearly. They appeared as shifting clouds of bright energy that sometimes took the shape of floating spheres or flowing ribbons. They communicated by changing colors and making musical sounds that could drive other species mad if heard for too long. They were ancient beyond measure and considered themselves the wisest beings in the galaxy. The Drakmori were the easiest for humans to understand because they looked somewhat familiar. They had 2 arms and 2 legs like humans, but they were much larger and covered in thick armor-like skin. Their faces had too many teeth and their eyes glowed red in the dark. They were warriors who had conquered hundreds of worlds. Rexthos, the prime counselor of the Vorthak, stood up from his crystal throne. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with thunder. The translation device in Hyon's ear made the words understandable. "The beings from the planet called Earth wish to join our council," Rexthos announced. "Let them present their offerings." Hyon stepped forward and bowed slightly. He had practiced this moment many times, but his heart was still beating fast. "Honored members of the Galactic Council, humanity comes before you with great respect. We offer our knowledge, our culture, and our desire to learn from the wisdom of the galaxy." Dr. Mina opened her case and began displaying human technology. She showed them examples of fusion reactors, chemical rockets, computers, and medical equipment. She explained how humans had learned to split atoms and travel to nearby planets. She talked about human art and music, showing pictures of great buildings and playing recordings of symphonies. The reaction from the aliens was not what they had hoped for. A Vorthak scientist named Kalros examined the fusion reactor with what looked like amusement. His crystal body changed from blue to yellow, which the translation device told them meant he found something funny. "This primitive device barely contains the power of a small star fragment," he said in a voice that sounded bored. "Our children create better energy sources as learning exercises." The Quellan representative, a shifting cloud called Nethys, pulsed with bright orange light. The translation device crackled as it tried to convert the aliens' communication. "Chemical propulsion for space travel. How charmingly ancient. We abandoned such crude methods before your species learned to make fire." Commander Jinwoo stepped forward when Dr. Mina showed examples of human weapons and military equipment. He explained human strategy and tactics, describing famous battles from Earth's history. He talked about human courage and determination in the face of impossible odds. Battle leader Kraxon of the Drakmori let out a sound that might have been laughter. It sounded like rocks grinding together. "Your warriors fight with metal sticks that throw small pieces of metal," he said, his red eyes glowing brighter. "One of my soldiers could break 100 of your kind with bare hands. Your weapons would not even scratch our armor." The biological samples drew the most attention, but not in a good way. Dr. Mina carefully displayed preserved examples of human tissue, DNA samples, and recordings of human biological functions. She explained how humans could heal from injuries and adapt to different environments. A Vorthak biologist picked up one of the samples with an energy field, the crystal being examined it for a few seconds before setting it down with what looked like disappointment. Carbon-based life forms with liquid water dependency, the alien said. Simple chemical processes with limited adaptation capability. Their bodies fail after only a few decades of operation. Nethys the Qualan pulsed with colors that the translator said meant curiosity mixed with pity. Such fragile creatures, they require specific atmospheric conditions to survive. They cannot even exist in the vacuum of space without artificial protection. How did they manage to leave their planet at all? The examination continued for hours. Every human achievement was compared to alien technology and found lacking. Their art was called simplistic. Their music was described as noise. Their literature was dismissed as primitive storytelling. Their science was labeled as barely beyond the level of children playing with dangerous toys. Hyun watched all of this with growing frustration, but he kept his face calm. Dr. Mina answered every question with patience, even when the aliens treated her like a student failing an exam. Commander Jinwoo stood at attention and said nothing, though his hands slowly formed fists behind his back. Finally, Rexthos called for the council to vote. The three major species huddled together in their separate groups, communicating in ways that human translation devices could not follow. Crystals flashed with different colors. Energy clouds swirled and pulsed. The Drakmori made growling sounds while pointing at the human representatives. After what felt like forever, Rexthos announced the decision. The council has decided to grant the humans membership in the galactic community, he said. However, given their primitive nature and limited capabilities, they will be placed in the lowest tier of membership. They may observe council meetings and participate in basic trade agreements. They will not be granted access to advanced technologies or allowed to vote on important matters. The crystal being paused and looked directly at Hyun. We find your species quaint, harmlessly primitive but interesting enough to preserve as a curiosity. Perhaps in a few thousand years, you will develop into something more significant. Hyun bowed again, deeper this time. We are honored by your acceptance and grateful for this opportunity to learn, he said. His voice was steady, but Dr. Mina noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. The meeting ended with formal ceremonies that meant nothing to the humans. They were given temporary quarters on the station and told they could begin their probationary membership immediately. As they walked back through the corridors, none of them spoke. It was only when they were alone in their assigned rooms that Commander Jinwoo finally broke the silence. They think we're pets, he said quietly. Dr. Mina was carefully repacking the human samples that had been returned to her. They have no idea what they just saw, she replied. They looked at our technology and our biology, but they didn't really see us. Hyun stood at the window looking out at the stars. His reflection showed a man who looked calm, but his eyes held something that had not been there before. Something cold and patient and very, very angry. Let them underestimate us, he said softly. Let them think they know what humanity is capable of. They'll learn the truth soon enough. In the storage bay where the human samples were kept, something was already beginning to change. The aliens had been so busy laughing that they had not noticed the way the biological specimens were reacting to their new environment. Deep inside the preserved tissue, cells were slowly waking up. The package from Earth was not as simple as it appeared. 3 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council as the lowest members. Dr. Mina now worked in the Xenobiology division of Nexus Prime, studying alien life forms alongside scientists from across the galaxy. Every day brought new humiliations disguised as learning opportunities. The Xenobiology lab was a massive space filled with containers holding creatures from thousands of worlds, strange plants that grew in pure energy instead of soil, animals that existed in multiple dimensions at once, microscopic beings that could think faster than most organic brains could process information. Dr. Mina stood before a holographic display, showing human cellular structure. Around her, alien scientists watched with the kind of attention usually reserved for children's presentations. She had been asked to explain human biology to help other species understand Earth life forms. Human. Cells divide through a process called mitosis, she explained, pointing to the display. Our bodies can heal from injuries by growing new tissue to replace damaged areas. Cal Ross, the Vorthak scientist, made the crystal equivalent of a snort. His body flashed yellow with amusement. Such slow repair mechanisms, he said. Vorthak crystal. Matrices can rebuild entire limbs in minutes. Human healing takes weeks or months for even minor damage. A Qualan researcher named Vorthis pulsed with pale blue light. Carbon-based repair systems are inherently inefficient, the energy being communicated. We can restructure our energy patterns instantly to remove damage. These humans are trapped in failing biological containers. Dr. Mina kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt anger building. Human biology may seem simple, but we have remarkable adaptation capabilities, she said carefully. We can survive in many different environments and adjust to new challenges. This statement caused what could only be described as alien laughter. Crystals chimed with mocking tones. Energy clouds flickered with dismissive colors. Even the usually serious researchers from other species seemed amused. Adaptation, repeated a Drakmori scientist named Vex. Humans require breathing apparatus to survive in space. They need protective suits to visit worlds with different atmospheres. They cannot even exist underwater for more than a few minutes. Where is this adaptation you speak of? Dr. Mina wanted to explain that human adaptation was not just physical, that humans could learn new skills faster than most species, that they could find ways to survive in situations that would kill others through pure determination and creativity. But she knew these aliens would not understand. To them, strength meant only physical power or technological superiority. Meanwhile, Commander Jinwoo was observing military exercises in the station's combat training facilities. The Drakmori had invited him to watch their warriors practice, though it was clearly meant to intimidate rather than educate him. The training ground was enormous, with gravity fields that could be adjusted to match any world's conditions. Drakmori soldiers moved through combat scenarios that would be impossible for human forces to survive. They lifted weights that would crush human bones. They fought with weapons that fired energy blasts hot enough to melt steel. Battle leader Kraxon gestured toward his warriors with obvious pride. "Watch how real soldiers fight," he told Jinwoo. "These warriors have conquered 50 worlds. Each one could destroy your entire human military without assistance." Jinwoo watched a Drakmori soldier tear apart a practice target made of hardened metal. The warrior used only its bare hands, shredding the target like paper. Other soldiers fired, weapons that created explosions visible from space. Their movements were faster than human eyes could follow. "Impressive," Jinwoo said quietly. He meant it, but not in the way Kraxon thought. "Your human warriors fight with primitive projectile weapons," Kraxon continued. "They wear weak armor that cannot stop our basic training weapons. They move slowly and tire quickly. How did such weak creatures even develop space travel?" Jinwoo did not answer immediately. He was studying the Drakmori fighting techniques, noting their patterns and weaknesses. The aliens were incredibly strong and fast, but they relied entirely on brute force. Their tactics were simple and direct. They had never needed to develop complex strategies because their physical advantages were so great. "Human warriors may be physically weaker," Jinwoo finally replied. "But we have other strengths." Kraxon made the grinding sound that passed for Drakmori laughter. "What strengths could possibly matter against such power?" "We learn," Jinwoo said simply. While the humans dealt with daily condescension, disturbing news was spreading through the galaxy. Reports came from the outer rim territories of entire star systems going silent. At first, the major powers assumed it was pirates or some minor rebellion. Such things happened occasionally and were usually dealt with quickly. But the pattern was wrong. Pirates took what they wanted and left. Rebellions made demands and sent messages. These disappearances were complete and absolute. Systems went dark all at once, cutting off all communication without warning. The first confirmed contact with the threat came from the Kepler 442 system, home to a major Vorthak mining operation. The crystalline beings had established a colony there to harvest rare energy crystals that powered their technology. The mining station's final transmission was brief and terrifying. The communications officer, a Vorthak named Queller, spoke in rapid bursts as alarms sounded in the background. Unknown entities approaching the system. They do not respond to communication attempts. They do not match any known species profiles. They appear to be consuming matter and energy directly. The outer defense platforms are changing. They are becoming something else. The entities are learning from our technology. They are copying our crystal matrices but making them wrong. Everything they touch starts screaming. We are requesting immediate assistance. We are requesting. They are here. They are inside the station. They are inside our minds. They are teaching our crystals to hunger. We are becoming them. We are becoming. The transmission ended in static. Emergency meetings were called across the galaxy. The three major powers gathered their military leaders and scientists to analyze the threat. The Vorthak sent scout ships to investigate the Kepler 442 system. The Qualans deployed energy-based probes that could travel faster than light. The Drakmori prepared war fleets for immediate deployment. All evidence pointed to something new and dangerous moving through space, consuming everything in its path. But the major powers were not particularly worried. They had faced threats before, and always emerged victorious. Their combined might had never been seriously challenged. The humans were not invited to these emergency sessions. Their membership level was too low to participate in military discussions. They were told only that there was a minor security situation being handled by the proper authorities. Heon learned about the threat by listening to conversations in the station's corridors. Alien diplomats spoke carelessly around humans, assuming they were too primitive to understand the significance of what was happening. In the human quarters that night, Heon met with Dr. Mina and Commander Jinwoo to share what he had learned. Something is destroying entire star systems, Heon explained quietly. The aliens are calling it the Void Swarm. It appears to consume matter and energy, but also learns from what it destroys. Dr. Mina looked thoughtful. A species that adapts by absorbing other life forms. That is, concerning. The major powers are mobilizing their fleets, Jinwoo added. They seem confident they can handle whatever this threat is. Hyun was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. They have not asked for human assistance. They still see us as too weak to contribute anything meaningful. Perhaps that is for the best, Dr. Mina said softly. If this void swarm learns from what it encounters, it might be better that it does not learn about us yet. In the storage bay where the human biological samples were kept, changes continued to occur that the aliens had not noticed. The tissue, samples were reacting to the artificial environment of the space station. They were adapting in ways that should not have been possible for preserved specimens. Cell structures were reorganizing themselves. DNA was rewriting its own code. The samples were learning from their surroundings, taking in information about alien biology and technology through means that conventional science could not explain. Something was waking up in humanity's package, something that had been sleeping, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The aliens had been so busy laughing at human weakness that they had not seen the true nature of what Earth had sent to the stars. Soon, they would understand their mistake. But by then, it would be too late to change course. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their physical abilities. It was their capacity to become something more than what they appeared to be. And in the darkness between stars, the Void Swarm continued its advance toward the heart of galactic civilization, unaware that it was about to encounter something that would change the nature of the conflict entirely. The Vorthak Defense Fleet arrived at the Kepler 442 system with full confidence in their abilities. 50 crystal ships, each one capable of destroying planets, moved through space like beautiful, deadly jewels. Their hulls glowed with contained energy that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Admiral Zenthos commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive crystal structure that looked more like a floating cathedral than a military vessel. The Vorthak had been the dominant military force in the galaxy for over 10,000 years. No enemy had ever withstood their power for long. Sensors detect multiple unidentified objects throughout the system, reported the scanning officer. They appear to be consuming the mining stations and defense platforms. Xanthos examined the data with crystalline appendages that processed information faster than most organic brains could think. What he saw was disturbing, but not frightening. The unknown entities were large, roughly the size of small moons, and they moved through space by unknown means. Begin standard engagement protocols, Xanthos ordered. Target the largest concentrations of enemy forces. The Vorthak ships opened fire with weapons that could crack planets. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, each one containing enough power to boil oceans. The beams struck their targets and seemed to be absorbed into the dark surfaces of the enemy entities. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entities began to change. Dark surfaces started to glitter with crystal-like formations that looked disturbingly familiar. The absorbed Vorthak energy was being restructured into something that resembled Vorthak technology, but felt fundamentally wrong. The crystals that formed on the entity surfaces were not the clean, geometric patterns of natural Vorthak growth. They were twisted, hungry things that seemed to reach toward the defense fleet. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we are receiving transmissions from the entities." "Put them through," Xanthos ordered. What came through the speakers was not language. It was something much worse. The sounds were Vorthak crystal harmonics, but they carried meanings that no Vorthak had ever intended to create. The harmonics spoke of hunger that could never be satisfied, of learning that came through consumption, of the joy of absorbing and becoming something greater through destruction. Several crew members began to resonate in harmony with the transmissions before catching themselves. Their crystal bodies flickered with patterns they had never seen before, patterns that felt seductive and terrifying at the same time. "Cut all communications immediately," Xanthos commanded. But it was too late. The entities had learned enough from the energy absorption to begin replicating Vorthak technology. Twisted crystal formations on their surfaces began firing energy, beams back at the defense fleet. The beams were similar to Vorthak weapons, but wrong in fundamental ways. Instead of simply destroying matter, they seemed to infect it with the same wrongness that affected the entities themselves. Where the corrupted beams struck Vorthak ships, the crystal hulls began to change. Clean geometric patterns became chaotic and hungry-looking. Crew members found their own bodies starting to resonate with alien frequencies that made them want to join with the attacking entities. Admiral Xanthos ordered a full retreat, but half of his fleet was already compromised. Ships that had served the Vorthak for centuries turned their weapons on their own allies, their crystal matrices rewritten by contact with the Void Swarm. The flagship barely escaped the system, its hull scarred with crystal growths that had to be cut away before they could spread to the crew. Of the 50 ships that had entered Kepler 442, only 12 emerged intact. The rest had either been destroyed or converted into something that no longer served the Vorthak Empire. News of the IDA disaster spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. The Vorthak, who had not lost a major battle in millennia, had been not just defeated but corrupted by an unknown enemy. The Quailans responded with typical arrogance. As beings of pure energy, they considered themselves immune to whatever had affected the crystalline Vorthak. They dispatched 20 of their fastest scouts to investigate the threat and gather intelligence. The Quailan scouts were beings of pure consciousness that could travel at near light speed. They had no physical forms that could be destroyed or corrupted. They existed as patterns of organized energy that could observe and record information without being detected by most enemies. 19 of the 20 scouts that entered Void Swarm territory never returned. The one that did return was barely recognizable as a Quailan. Scout Methys materialized in the Quailan High Chamber as a flickering, unstable cloud of energy that pulsed with colors no Quailan had ever produced. Instead of the usual harmonious patterns that characterized healthy Quailan consciousness, Methys displayed chaotic bursts of conflicting information. "Report," commanded High Counselor Nithros. Methys attempted to communicate, but the result was terrifying. Instead of normal Quailan energy, harmonics, the scout produced sounds and colors that seemed to carry fragments of alien consciousness. The other Quailans in the chamber began to experience feedback from Methys's damaged patterns. The swarm, Methys managed to communicate through the chaos. It does not just consume matter and energy. It consumes information, experience, memory. It learns not just how things work, but what they are, what they mean, what they feel. The damaged scout's energy patterns showed flashes of experiences that belonged to other species, Vorthak crystal formations, organic life forms from consumed worlds, technologies and cultures that had been absorbed into the growing mass of the void swarm. It kept the other scouts, Methys continued, the words coming in bursts between waves of alien interference, not destroyed, integrated. They are still alive inside it, teaching it what we are, how we think, how we exist. It is learning to be us while remaining itself. High Counselor Nithros tried to probe deeper into Methys's damaged consciousness, but the contact sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several Quillans flickered and almost lost cohesion as they experienced fragments of the void swarm's hunger. The scout's final communication before complete breakdown was a warning that chilled every Quillan present. It is coming to the core systems. It knows where we are now. It knows what we have. And it wants to learn everything we know about energy and consciousness. Methys dissolved into random energy patterns that had to be contained before they could infect other Quillans with whatever the scout had experienced. On Nexus Prime, emergency sessions began immediately. The three major powers found themselves facing a threat unlike anything they had encountered before. The Vorthak had lost their technological superiority. The Quillans had proven vulnerable despite their energy-based nature. Only the Drakmori remained confident in their ability to handle the situation. Battle leader Kraxon addressed the emergency council with typical warrior arrogance. The Vorthak failed because they relied on technology. The Quillans failed because they have no physical strength. The Drakmori will succeed because we are warriors. We do not fear any enemy. Preparations began immediately for a massive Drakmori military response. War fleets that had conquered hundreds of worlds began moving toward the outer rim territories where the void swarm had last been detected. The humans were still not invited to participate in these discussions. Their quarters were placed under informal surveillance to ensure they did not interfere with military operations. The major powers could not risk having primitive beings complicate their response to the crisis. But in the restricted storage areas of the station, the human biological samples continued their silent transformation. The specimens that had appeared harmless were now actively processing information about the station's environment and its inhabitants. They were learning about Vorthak crystal technology, Quillan energy manipulation, and Drakmori biological structures. Deep within the preserved tissue, new cellular structures were forming that should not have been possible. DNA sequences were rewriting themselves to incorporate information about alien biology and technology. The samples were becoming something that was still recognizably human, but also something much more. Dr. Mina began to notice anomalies in her work that the alien scientists dismissed as equipment malfunctions. Sensors in the xenobiology lab occasionally detected unusual energy signatures near the human samples. Temperature readings fluctuated for no apparent reason. Electromagnetic fields showed patterns that did not match any known biological activity. When she tried to investigate further, her alien colleagues told her that primitive human instruments were simply not sensitive enough to work properly in advanced alien facilities. They suggested she focus on learning from their superior technology rather than trying to conduct her own research. But Dr. Mina had worked with human biology for decades. She knew when something was changing in ways that normal science could not explain. The samples were not just preserved specimens anymore, they were developing into something new. Commander Jinwoo noticed different changes during his observations of Drakmori military exercises. The warriors were becoming more aggressive and confident as news of the void swarm spread. They spoke constantly about proving their superiority over the threat that had defeated other species. "Let this swarm come," Kraxon boasted during one training session. "It will learn what happens when it faces real warriors, instead of soft crystal builders and weak energy ghosts." But Jinwoo saw something in the Drakmori preparations that worried him. They were planning to meet the Void Swarm with the same direct tactics they had always used. Overwhelming force applied without subtlety or strategy. They had never needed to adapt their methods because their physical advantages had always been sufficient. Against an enemy that learned from every encounter, such predictable tactics might be exactly the wrong approach. In his private quarters, that night, Jinwoo made detailed notes about Drakmori military capabilities and weaknesses. He had no authority to share this information with Earth or to influence the alien response to the threat. But some instinct told him that humanity might need this knowledge sooner than anyone expected. Ambassador Hyon spent his days attending low-level diplomatic meetings and observing the growing panic among the station's population. Civilian ships were fleeing from the outer territories in increasing numbers. Trade routes were being abandoned as entire sectors went dark. The major powers maintained their confident facade, but Hyon could see the cracks beginning to show. Alien diplomats who had treated humans with condescending amusement now barely acknowledged their presence. They were too busy dealing with a crisis that challenged everything they believed about their own superiority. Late at night, when the station's corridors were mostly empty, Hyon sometimes walked past the storage areas where humanity's package was kept. He could not explain why, but something told him that the samples from Earth were more important now than they had been when they first arrived. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict, and somehow, humanity would be at the center of that change, whether the major powers wanted them there or not. In the darkness between stars, the Void Swarm continued its advance toward the core systems. It had learned much from its encounters with the Vorthak and Quellans. Now it knew about crystal technology and energy manipulation. It understood how galactic civilization was organized and where its most valuable targets could be found. But the swarm did not yet know about humanity. The samples it would eventually encounter would teach it something entirely different from what it had learned from other species. Something that might change the nature of the threat itself. The Drakmori war fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 3,000 ships filled with the most dangerous warriors from hundreds of conquered worlds. Each vessel bristled with weapons that could level continents. The combined firepower could destroy entire star systems if deployed at full strength. War Marshal Thaxon commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that had served as the tip of the Drakmori spear for centuries. His red eyes glowed with anticipation as he reviewed the battle plans that had never failed to bring victory. "The enemy will learn what it means to face true warriors," Thaxon announced to his battle leaders. "We will engage them directly and destroy them through superior force. No retreat, no mercy, no survivors." The Drakmori had studied the reports from Vorthak and Quellan encounters with the Void Swarm. They dismissed the failures as weakness rather than warnings. The crystal beings had relied too much on technology. The energy ghosts had no physical strength to apply when their tricks failed. But the Drakmori were different. They were warriors in the purest sense. The fleet engaged the Void Swarm at the Procyon system, where the entities had been consuming the remains of a Vorthak research station. The Drakmori ships formed into their traditional attack formation, a massive wedge designed to punch through enemy lines with overwhelming force. "All ships open fire," Thaxon commanded. The combined weapons of 3,000 warships fired simultaneously. The energy released was visible from neighboring star systems. Space itself seemed to burn as concentrated destruction poured into the Void Swarm entities. For several minutes it appeared that the Drakmori approach was working. The alien entities writhed under the assault, their dark surfaces cracking and splitting under the sustained bombardment. Several of the smaller entities seemed to dissolve entirely under the firepower. Then the swarm began to adapt. The entities had learned much from their previous encounters. They had absorbed Vorthak crystal technology and Quellan energy manipulation techniques. But they had never experienced the pure physical force that defined Drakmori military doctrine. Dark surfaces began to shift and harden, incorporating elements absorbed from destroyed Vorthak ships. The entities developed armor-like exteriors that could deflect energy weapons. But more disturbing were the organic-looking protrusions that began to emerge from their bodies. The Void Swarm had encountered biological matter from consumed worlds. It had learned about muscle and bone, about the way living tissue could generate and apply physical force. Now it began to create its own versions of biological systems, but twisted and enhanced beyond anything that had evolved naturally. Massive, tentacle-like appendages erupted from the largest entities, each one the size of a Drakmori battleship. The appendages moved with impossible speed and strength, reaching across space to grab enemy vessels. When they made contact, the ships began to change. Drakmori warriors found their own armor-like skin beginning to shift and grow. Their enhanced strength increased beyond normal limits, but it came with a hunger that could not be satisfied. Affected warriors turned on their crewmates, trying to absorb them into their own changing bodies. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we are losing ships to internal conflicts. The crews are attacking each other." War Marshal Thaxon watched in horror as his perfect military formation dissolved into chaos. Ships fired on their own, allies as infected warriors took control. The entities were not just copying Drakmori biological traits, they were improving on them and using them to turn the warriors against themselves. "All ships retreat immediately," Thaxon ordered, abandoning centuries of military doctrine in a single moment. But retreat was no longer possible. The Void Swarm had learned about Drakmori tactics and technology. It knew how their ships moved, how their weapons worked, how their warriors thought. The entities began using captured vessels and converted warriors to prevent escape. Of the 3,000 ships that had entered the Procyon system, fewer than 200 managed to escape. The rest were either destroyed or converted into something that served the swarm, while retaining enough Drakmori characteristics to be recognizable as corrupted versions of their former selves. On Nexus Prime, news of the disaster caused panic, that the major powers could no longer hide. The 3 strongest species in the galaxy had all been defeated by the same enemy. Their combined military might had proven insufficient to stop the Void Swarm's advance. Emergency evacuation procedures began immediately. Civilian populations fled toward the core systems while military forces tried to establish defensive positions. But everyone knew that if the swarm could defeat the major powers so easily, nowhere in the galaxy would be truly safe. In the chaos of the evacuation, normal security protocols began to break down. Dr. Mina found herself with access to areas of the station that had previously been restricted to humans, including the storage bay where humanity's package had been kept since their arrival months ago. She entered the storage area expecting to find the same biological samples and primitive technology that had been dismissed by the alien scientists. Instead, she discovered something that should have been impossible. The biological samples were alive. Not just alive, but actively growing and changing. The preserved tissue had somehow regenerated into complex structures that pulsed with their own internal rhythms. The DNA samples had developed into multicellular organisms that bore only passing resemblance to baseline human biology. Most disturbing of all, the samples seemed to be responding to her presence. As she approached the containers, the organisms inside began to move in coordinated patterns. They were communicating with each other through means she could not identify, but she could sense their awareness of her arrival. "What have you become?" she whispered to herself. The answer came not in words but in a flood of information that entered her mind directly. The samples had been learning since their arrival on the station. They had absorbed data about alien technology, biology, and culture through processes that conventional science could not explain. They had been adapting not just to the environment, but to the knowledge they gained about the galaxy around them. But they were still human at their core. They remembered Earth. They remembered the people who had sent them to the stars. And they remembered the promise that humanity would find a way to survive and thrive no matter what challenges they faced. Dr. Mina understood with sudden clarity that the samples had never been simple specimens. They were a backup plan, a way for humanity to adapt and evolve if they encountered threats that their baseline biology could not handle. Earth had sent much more than a package of curiosities to the Galactic Council. They had sent the seeds of humanity's future. Working quickly, she began documenting what she observed. The organisms had developed capabilities that combined human biological systems with alien technologies they had somehow learned to replicate. They could process energy like the Quellans, manipulate matter like the Vorthak, and generate physical force like the Drakmori. But unlike the alien species, they had retained human creativity and adaptability. They could combine different approaches in ways that no single alien species had ever attempted. They were becoming something new while remaining fundamentally human. Her work was interrupted by the arrival of Deho and Somin, two human researchers, who had been assigned to minor positions in the station's science division. They had come looking for her when the evacuation alarms began sounding. "The major powers are evacuating the station," Deho reported. "They want all non-essential personnel to leave immediately." "That includes us," Somin added. "We are supposed to report to the human transport ships within the hour." Dr. Mina looked at the growing organisms in their containers. "We cannot leave these behind. They are too important." "What are they?" Deho asked, moving closer to examine the strange biological structures. "They are what humanity was always meant to become," Dr. Mina replied. "Earth did not send us here just to join the Galactic Council. They sent us here to prepare for something like this." The three humans worked together to carefully remove the samples from their storage containers. The organisms seemed to understand what was happening and cooperated with the transfer process. Some of them began to merge together, forming larger and more complex structures that pulsed with increasing energy. As they worked, Ambassador Hyon arrived in the storage bay. He had come to check on the human package before the evacuation, but stopped in amazement when he saw what the samples had become. "How long have they been like this?" he asked quietly. "They have been changing since we arrived," Dr. Mina explained. "But the transformation has accelerated recently. I think they are responding to the crisis. They know the galaxy needs something new to deal with the Void Swarm." Hyon made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of following evacuation procedures, he activated a quantum communication device that should have been beyond human technology. The device had been hidden in the diplomatic equipment. Disguised, simple data recorder. "This is Ambassador Hyon calling Earth Command," he transmitted. "The package has awakened. Request immediate deployment of contingency protocols." The response came not as words. Earth's response arrived 12 hours later. But it came in a form that made every sensor on Nexus Prime scream warnings about impossible energy signatures. The ships that emerged from quantum space were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They looked alive. Hull plating rippled like skin. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing. Energy conduits pulsed with rhythms that matched biological heartbeats. The vessels moved through space with organic grace, changing their own structure as they flew to adapt to different tactical needs. Captain Sunho stood on the bridge of the lead ship, but he was no longer entirely human. The journey through dark space had changed him and his crew in ways that would have horrified the original human colonists who had left Earth centuries ago. His eyes held depths that reflected experiences beyond normal human understanding. When he spoke to the Galactic Council through the station's communication system, his voice carried harmonics that should not have been possible from a human throat. Multiple tones layered together to create sounds that bypassed normal hearing and communicated directly with the listener's consciousness. "This is Captain Sunho of the Earth Defense Force," he announced. "We have come to assist with the Void Swarm crisis." The alien leaders who remained on Nexus Prime gathered in the emergency council chamber to respond. Most of the major power representatives had already evacuated, but those who stayed were desperate enough to listen to anyone who claimed they could help. Rexthos the Vorthak spoke first, his crystal body flickering with confused patterns. "Your ships do not match any known human technology. How is this possible?" "Humanity has been preparing for this day for longer than you realize," Sunho replied. "We have been studying the galaxy and learning from species you have never encountered. We have adapted our biology and technology to survive threats that conventional forces cannot handle." High Counselor Nithros of the Quellans pulsed with skeptical energy patterns. "No species can develop such capabilities without our knowledge. We have monitored human space for decades." Sunho's smile was visible even through the communication link, and it was not entirely human anymore. "We do not defeat it, we cure it." The human fleet moved toward the advancing void swarm with tactics that horrified the watching aliens. Instead of maintaining safe distances and firing from long range, the human ships deliberately allowed themselves to be caught by the swarm's reaching appendages. What happened next defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about space combat. When the void swarm entities tried to consume the human vessels, they encountered something they had never experienced before. The ship's living hulls began to adapt to the consumption process, but instead of being destroyed or converted, they started to integrate with the swarm itself. Human crews that should have been killed or corrupted began to function as antibodies within the cosmic infection. They moved through the internal structures of the swarm entities, but instead of being absorbed, they began to heal the damage that eons of mindless hunger had caused. Dr. Mina watched the battle from Nexus Prime's observation deck, monitoring the biological readings that the station's sensors could detect. What she saw was impossible according to conventional science, but it made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of advanced human adaptation. They are not fighting the swarm, she explained to the alien observers. They are treating it like a disease. The human crews are acting as living medicine, repairing whatever caused these entities to become consumed by hunger. The sounds coming from the battle zone were unlike anything heard in galactic warfare. Instead of the explosions and energy discharges of normal combat, there were voices. Human voices singing in harmony with sounds that seemed to come from the swarm entities themselves. But the singing was not entirely human. The crews had been changed by their journey through dark space, enhanced with capabilities that allowed them to communicate with non-human consciousness. They could speak directly to the swarm's damaged minds, offering healing instead of destruction. Commander Jinwoo led one of the boarding parties that entered a massive swarm entity through what had once been a consumed Vorthak mining ship. His enhanced biology allowed him to survive in environments that would kill baseline humans. But more importantly, his modified consciousness could reach out to the alien intelligence that controlled the entity. "We know what you are," he communicated through methods that bypassed normal language. "You were explorers once, scientists. You traveled between stars to study and learn. But something went wrong. You became trapped in the void between galaxies, for so long that you forgot how to exist without consuming others." The response came as flashes of memory that flooded through Jinwoo's enhanced mind, images of a species that had once been curious and peaceful, driven to explore the universe and understand its mysteries. But they had ventured too far into empty space and become lost for millions of years with nothing to sustain them except the energy of their own bodies. Hunger had driven them to madness. They had learned to consume other forms of life to survive, but the process had damaged their minds until they could no longer remember what they had originally been. They became the void swarm not through choice but through desperate necessity that had continued long past the point where it was needed. "You do not have to be this way anymore," Jinwoo continued. "We can teach you how to exist without consuming others. We can help you remember what you were before the hunger." Throughout the swarm, human crews worked to repair not just physical damage but psychological trauma that had lasted for eons. They used capabilities that combined human empathy with alien technology to reach minds that had been twisted by isolation and desperation. The process was not gentle. The swarm entities fought against the healing, trying to consume the humans who were trying to help them. But the human crews had been prepared for this resistance. They had been enhanced not just to survive the consumption process, but to use it as a way to deliver healing directly into the swarm's consciousness. Engineer Taewon demonstrated humanity's true technological capabilities as he worked to integrate human biotechnology with the swarm's organic systems. The tools he used were living creatures that had been designed to repair and enhance other forms of life. Human technology was never about building better machines, he explained to the aliens monitoring the process. It was about becoming better ourselves. We learned to merge biology with technology so completely that the distinction became meaningless. The devices he deployed looked like a cross between medical equipment and living creatures. They moved through the swarm's body like beneficial bacteria, repairing damage and establishing new neural pathways that could support healthy consciousness instead of mindless hunger. But the most important work was being done by crew members who had volunteered to be partially consumed by the swarm entities. They allowed themselves to be integrated into the alien consciousness while maintaining their own human identity and purpose. From inside the swarm's mind, they could guide the healing process directly. They became bridges between human empathy and alien experience, helping the damaged entities remember what it felt like to exist without constant hunger. The battle, if it could still be called that, continued for days. Human ships that were consumed by the swarm emerged changed but not destroyed. They had become hybrid vessels that combined human adaptability with alien capabilities, serving as mobile treatment centers for the healing process. The screams that had given the story its title were not sounds of pain or anger. They were the voices of creatures that had been trapped in madness for millions of years, finally being able to express emotions other than hunger. The swarm entities were screaming with relief, with gratitude, with the joy of remembering what they had once been. As the healing progressed, the entities began to change physically as well as mentally. The twisted, hunger-driven forms that had terrorized the galaxy slowly shifted into something more recognizable as the advanced civilization they had originally been. The galaxy watched in amazement as the greatest threat they had ever faced was transformed into something that could become a valuable member of galactic civilization. The Void Swarm was becoming the recovered collective, a species that remembered its original purpose of exploration and learning. But the transformation was only possible because of humanity's unique approach to the crisis. Where other species had seen only an enemy to be destroyed, humans had seen a patient to be healed. Their combination of advanced biotechnology and enhanced empathy had made possible what no conventional military force could achieve. Captain Sunho addressed the Galactic Council one final time as the last of the swarm entities completed their transformation. This is what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not superior weapons or technology, but the ability to find hope and healing even in our enemies. The major powers that had dismissed humanity as primitive now found themselves in a galaxy where the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. The species they had laughed at had proven capable of accomplishing what their combined might could not. And in the storage bay of Nexus Prime, the original biological samples from Earth continued to grow and evolve, preparing for whatever new challenges the galaxy might face. Humanity's package had finally revealed its true purpose, and the cosmos would never underestimate them again. Response carried undertones of amusement that made the aliens uncomfortable. You monitored what we wanted you to see. Humanity learned long ago that survival sometimes requires deception. We showed you primitive technology while developing something very different in secret. Battle leader Kraxon, one of the few Drakmori survivors from the Procyon disaster, growled his disbelief. Even if your technology is more advanced than you claimed, you cannot succeed where 3,000 Drakmori warships failed. You failed because you fought the swarm the way you always fight, Sunho explained. With overwhelming force applied, directly, but the swarm learns from every encounter. It adapts and overcomes whatever strategy you use against it. Then how do you propose to defeat it? Rexthos demanded. Sunho's. 6 months after the healing of the Void Swarm, the Galactic Council convened for the most important session in its history. The same chamber where humanity had once been dismissed as primitive curiosities now served as the meeting place for a completely transformed galactic civilization. Ambassador Heon stood at the center of the council floor, but he was no longer a supplicant seeking acceptance. The human delegation now occupied the seats that had once been reserved for the three major powers. The transformation of galactic politics had been as dramatic as the healing of the swarm itself. The Vorthak Empire, once proud masters of crystal technology, had seen their military might reduced to a fraction of its former strength. The survivors of their encounters with the Void Swarm sat in lesser seats, their crystal bodies dim with the humiliation of repeated defeats. Rexthos, still serving as a Vorthak representative despite his reduced status, spoke with harmonics that carried undertones of newfound respect. The Vorthak Collective formally requests human assistance in rebuilding our defense capabilities. We acknowledge that our previous methods were insufficient for modern galactic threats. The Quellans had suffered an even more dramatic fall from power. Their energy-based consciousness, once considered the pinnacle of evolutionary development, had proven vulnerable to psychological contamination from the Void Swarm. Many Quelan entities remained in treatment facilities run by human medical teams. Hi, Counselor Nithros flickered with patterns that showed deep uncertainty. The Quelan Confluence requests human guidance in developing mental defenses against consciousness-based attacks. We admit our understanding of psychological warfare was limited. But it was the Drakmori who had experienced the most complete reversal of fortune. Their warrior culture, built on the foundation of physical superiority and direct confrontation, had been shattered by their encounter with an enemy that turned their own strength against them. Battle leader Kraxon, one of the few Drakmori commanders to survive the Procyon disaster, stood before the council with his red eyes dimmed by defeat. The Drakmori war clans request human instruction in adaptive combat techniques. Our traditional methods proved inadequate against enemies that learn and evolve. Ambassador Hyon listened to each request with the same calm expression he had maintained during humanity's original presentation months ago. But now the context was completely different. The species that had once mocked human weakness were asking for help from the beings they had dismissed as harmlessly primitive. Humanity accepts these requests, Hyon replied. But our assistance comes with conditions that reflect the new reality of galactic civilization. The first condition was the complete restructuring of the Galactic Council itself. Membership would no longer be based on military strength or technological superiority. Instead, species would be evaluated on their ability to contribute to the collective welfare of galactic civilization. Dr. Mina had been promoted to head of the new Galactic Health Organization, a position that gave her authority over medical and biological research throughout known space. Her first initiative was the establishment of treatment centers for species affected by the Void Swarm encounter. Working with the recovered entities that had once been the swarm, she developed therapeutic techniques that could heal psychological trauma on a civilization-wide scale. The former swarm members, now calling themselves the Collective, had retained their ability to interface directly with other consciousness. Under human guidance, they became healers rather than consumers. The galaxy has learned that threats to consciousness can be as dangerous as threats to physical safety. Dr. Mina explained to a gathering of alien medical researchers. We must develop defenses that protect not just our bodies and our technology, but our minds and our souls. The alien researchers listened with the same careful attention that human students had once given to alien professors. The relationship between teacher and student had been completely reversed. Commander Jinwoo now led the Galactic Defense Initiative, a new military organization that emphasized adaptation and cooperation over raw force. Representatives from all species trained together in facilities that had been built using hybrid human-alien technology. The training methods were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of focusing on weapons and tactics, human instructors taught alien warriors how to think creatively under pressure, how to find unexpected solutions to impossible problems, how to turn disadvantages into advantages through pure determination and adaptability. Strength is not about how much force you can apply, Jinwoo told a class of mixed alien recruits. It is about how quickly you can change when your current approach is not working. The strongest warrior is the one who can become something new when the situation demands it. Drakmori warriors struggled with these concepts at first. Their entire culture had been built on the idea that superior force could overcome any obstacle. Learning to think before fighting was almost as difficult as learning a completely new language. But gradually they began to understand. The humans had defeated the Void Swarm not through superior weapons, but through superior adaptability. They had succeeded where others failed because they were willing to become something different when the situation required it. Captain Sunho had established the Deep Space Patrol, a fleet of hybrid human-alien vessels that monitored the outer regions of the galaxy for new threats. His crews were volunteers from multiple species who had undergone the same enhancement process that had allowed humans to survive integration with the Void Swarm. The enhanced beings were no longer entirely human, Vorthak, Quelan, or Drakmori. They had become something new that combined the best traits of all species while maintaining the adaptability that was humanity's greatest strength. "We patrol the darkness between stars," Sunho explained to new recruits. "Not to destroy what we find there, but to understand it, to heal it if it needs healing, to learn from it if it has something to teach us. The galaxy is full of wonders and terrors that we have not yet encountered." Engineer Tae-Wan led the effort to develop new technologies that merged biological and mechanical systems in ways that had once been considered impossible. The tools and weapons created by human-alien cooperation were alive in ways that made traditional technology seem primitive by comparison. Starships that could heal their own damage and adapt to new threats in real time. Weapons that could choose their own targets and modify their effects based on the situation. Communication systems that could interface directly with consciousness regardless of the species involved. Technology should serve life, not replace it, Tae-Wan taught alien engineers who were learning to work with living systems. The goal is not to build better machines, but to help all forms of life become the best versions of themselves. The transformation of galactic civilization was not without resistance. Some members of the major powers resented their reduced status and plotted to restore the old order through force. But these efforts failed because they relied on the same rigid thinking that had made them vulnerable to the Void Swarm in the first place. The new galactic order was built on principles of adaptation, cooperation, and continuous learning. Species that embraced these principles thrived in the new environment. Those that clung to old patterns of dominance and superiority found themselves increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The collective, the transformed entities that had once been the Void Swarm, became one of the most valued members of the new galactic civilization. Their ability to interface directly with consciousness made them ideal mediators for conflicts between species with radically different ways of thinking. Working under human guidance, they helped resolve disputes that had lasted for centuries. They facilitated communication between species that had previously been unable to understand each other. They served as bridges between different forms of consciousness, bringing unity to a galaxy that had once been divided by mutual incomprehension. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed the concept of strength itself. The old definition, based on the ability to destroy or dominate, had been replaced by a new understanding that emphasized the ability to adapt, heal, and grow. Species that had once competed for dominance now worked together to explore the mysteries of the universe. Scientists from different worlds collaborated on projects that no single species could have accomplished alone. Artists created works that expressed truths about existence that transcended the limitations of any individual perspective. In the depths of space, new explorations were launched not to conquer or consume, but to discover and understand. The galaxy had learned that its greatest strength lay not in the power of its individual members, but in their ability to work together toward common goals. Ambassador Hyon often returned to the observation deck where he had once stood watching alien ships flee the advancing Void Swarm. Now he watched a galaxy at peace, where former enemies worked together to build something better than any of them could have achieved alone. The package that Earth had sent to the stars had fulfilled its purpose in ways that none of the original planners could have imagined. It had not just gained humanity membership in galactic civilization,